All right, buckle up, because we're about to take a wild ride through the absolute worst moments in human history, times when survival was less a guarantee and more a desperate, sweaty coin toss. You're sitting there, probably munching on some chips, scrolling X, maybe sipping a coffee that's 80% sugar syrup. But you exist because thousands of your ancestors dodged extinction-level disasters, outsmarted predators, and somehow didn't trip over their own feet at the exact wrong moment. One wrong move, say a bad day hunting or a sneeze from the wrong rat, and poof, no you, no me, no Wi-Fi. We're diving into 5 of the most brutal periods humanity faced, ranking them from, ouch, that sucked, to, how are we even still here? We'll unpack how our ancestors clawed their way through, what they invented to survive, and how close we came to not making it. This is the story of human stubbornness, ingenuity, and sheer dumb luck. Let's roll, still evolving style. First up, number 5, the Younger Dryas, about 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. Picture Earth throwing a massive tantrum. After the Ice Age started to thaw, the planet said, nah, let's crank the freezer back up. Global temperatures plummeted by up to 15 degrees Celsius ADC in some regions, turning lush grasslands into icy tundras practically overnight. Glaciers that were retreating decided to make a comeback, like a bad ex. For your ancestors, this was a nightmare. They'd just gotten used to hunting smaller game and gathering plants in a warming world, and now the climate yeeted them back to square one. Food? Good luck. Herds of deer and bison vanished as vegetation withered. Your daily menu was whatever roots you could dig up from frozen dirt, or, if you were fancy, a half-starved rabbit. Starvation was the default setting. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains from this period showing signs of severe malnutrition, shorter statures, brittle bones, teeth worn down from chewing tough, fibrous plants. So how'd we survive? Humans got scrappy. They leaned hard into teamwork, forming tighter-knit groups to share what little they had. They invented better tools, like atlatls, basically stick throwers that gave spears more range and power to take down skittish game from farther away. Some groups migrated, following the last pockets of edible plants or animals, while others hugged coastlines, fishing with nets and hooks made from bone. Evidence from sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey shows humans were already building communal structures, maybe to band together for rituals or survival strategies. No one was writing Yelp reviews for best mammoth steak, but they were sharing knowledge, passing down tricks to outlast the cold. It wasn't pretty, but enough of them made it through to keep the human story going. Barely. Now, let's crank the dial to number 4, the Antonine Plague, around 165 to 1TD CE. Imagine living in the Roman Empire, the peak of ancient civilization. Roads, aqueducts, togas, the works. Then a mystery disease hitchhikes in, probably from trade routes in Asia, and suddenly everyone's coughing up their lungs. Historians think it was smallpox or measles, maybe both, and it was a slaughter. Up to 5 million people, 10% of the empire's population, dropped dead. Cities like Rome turned into ghost towns. Soldiers, merchants, even emperors weren't spared. Marcus Aurelius himself might have been taken out by it. Symptoms? Fever, diarrhea, sores that turned your skin into a horror show. If you caught it, you had a 30% chance of dying in agony within 2 weeks. No ventilators, no Tylenol, just a guy burning incense and praying to gods who clearly weren't listening. Survival was a grind. The Romans didn't know about germs, so their cures were mostly vibes. Herbal potions, bloodletting, or sacrificing a goat to Apollo. But they weren't totally helpless. Quarantine started to take shape. Infected people were isolated when possible, though crowded cities made that tough. Doctors like Galen observed symptoms and tried to track the disease, laying early groundwork for epidemiology. Communities leaned on local food stores and bartered to keep supplies moving, even as trade collapsed. Rural areas fared better, with less crowding, and some folks fled cities to hide out in the countryside. The empire wobbled but didn't fall, thanks to survivors who adapted, rebuilt, and kept society limping along. Your ancestors? They were the ones who didn't share a cup with the wrong guy. Jumping forward, number 3, the Columbian Exchange, starting in 1492. Christopher Columbus sails to the Americas, and it's not just spices and gold that cross the Atlantic, it's a biological wrecking ball. Old world diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza hit the Americas like a tsunami. Indigenous populations had zero immunity, and the results were apocalyptic. Estimates suggest 50 to 90% of Native Americans, tens of millions, died within a century. Entire civilizations, like the Aztec and Inca empires, crumbled under the weight of fever and pustules. Meanwhile, Europeans faced their own nightmares as syphilis, likely brought back from the New World, tore through their populations. It wasn't just disease. New crops like maize and potatoes reshaped diets, but not before famines hit when old world farming techniques flopped in new climates. How did humans make it? On both sides of the ocean, adaptation was key. In the Americas, surviving indigenous groups developed resistance over generations, often retreating to remote areas to rebuild. They shared knowledge of local crops, like corn and beans, which eventually saved European settlers from starvation. Think Thanksgiving, minus the warm fuzzies. Europeans, meanwhile, learned to quarantine syphilitic patients and developed crude treatments like mercury, which was as likely to kill you as cure you. The exchange also introduced calorie-dense crops to Europe, potatoes and maize-boosted populations, eventually fueling the Industrial Revolution. Your ancestors were the ones who didn't catch smallpox, didn't die of syphilis, and figured out how to grow a potato before the next famine hit. Now we're at number 2, the 30 Years' War, 1608 to 1648. Europe decided to have a massive, bloody family feud over religion, politics, and who got to boss who around. This wasn't just a war, it was a meat grinder. Armies of mercenaries roamed Germany, France, and beyond, burning villages, looting food, and spreading disease. Up to 8 million people died, some from swords and muskets, but most from starvation and plagues like typhus and dysentery. Armies didn't pack MREs, they foraged, which is a fancy way of saying they stole every scrap of food from farmers. One German town, Magdeburg, saw 20,000 of its 25,000 residents slaughtered or starved in a single siege. Civilians faced constant terror. Imagine hiding in your cellar while soldiers torch your roof and your kids cry from hunger. Survival demanded grit and cunning. Some families fled to fortified cities, though those often became disease traps. Others turned to banditry, stealing to eat. Communities developed early warning systems, like church bells signaling approaching armies, giving people time to hide. Farmers hid grain in secret cellars or buried it in fields to outsmart looters. The war also spurred innovation. Better fortifications, early modern banking to fund armies, and even diplomatic agreements like the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the carnage. Your ancestors were the ones who hid their last sack of barley, dodged the mercenary's blade, and didn't drink from the contaminated well. They were the ultimate survivors in a world gone mad. And now, the number one worst time to be human, the Justinian Plague, 541 to 549 CE. This was the Black Death's meaner older cousin. Caused by Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium behind the later plague, it swept through the Byzantine Empire and beyond, killing an estimated 25 to 50% of the Mediterranean's population, tens of millions. Constantinople, the glittering capital, lost half its people. Corpses piled up so fast they were dumped in mass graves or left rotting in the streets. Symptoms were brutal: fever, chills, and those infamous buboes, swollen lymph nodes that burst with pus and blood. You could be fine at breakfast and dead by dinner. Trade routes spread it like wildfire, from Egypt to Europe to Persia. The Emperor Justinian himself caught it and somehow survived, but his empire nearly didn't. How did anyone make it through? Pure tenacity and a bit of luck. Quarantine was a game changer. Byzantine officials started isolating ships and travelers, a practice that saved some cities. Survivors gained immunity, and communities leaned on local agriculture to avoid starvation when trade collapsed. Monks and nuns stepped up, caring for the sick in early hospitals, though many died trying. The plague also forced innovation. Justinian's legal reforms and infrastructure projects, like aqueducts, kept society from totally imploding. Archaeological evidence shows rural areas recovered faster, as survivors rebuilt away from crowded cities. Your ancestors were the ones who locked their doors, boiled their water, and prayed to every saint they knew. They didn't know it, but they were keeping humanity's flame alive. So, what's the takeaway? You're here because your ancestors were the ultimate cockroaches, adaptable, stubborn, and just lucky enough to dodge the Grim Reaper. The Younger Dryas taught them to hunt smarter and stick together. The Antonine Plague showed them how to outlast invisible killers. The Columbian Exchange forced them to adapt to new worlds and new diseases. The 30 Years' War made them masters of hiding and hustling. And the Justinian Plague? That was a masterclass in surviving when half the world was a graveyard. Every one of these disasters could have ended the human story, but your ancestors said, "Not today." They invented tools, shared food, ran from danger, and sometimes just got stupidly lucky. You're not just alive, you're the product of a million near misses, a walking middle finger to extinction. Thanks for watching, still evolving fam. You're the descendants of the toughest, scrappiest humans who ever lived. So hit that subscribe button, because if they could survive a plague-ridden hellscape, you can survive clicking a button. Let's keep evolving together. See you next time.